second? Well, thank you very much for coming. My name is Gene Shia. I'm with Third Foreman. And I am the consultant that is leading the design effort, but certainly not responsible for all of it, because we have a great consultant team, and many of them came up here. Plus, we had input from you from our last meeting in terms of what we should provide for our life in the future. So, let me start and first talk about our alternatives. And what our alternative is basically giving you some choices in terms of choosing which direction you would like your city to be planned for. And, Rick mentioned the sustainable features, and certainly these are broad concepts in terms of how we want things to happen, and ultimately goes into a general plan, which is general in terms of how things are located and the pattern of intensity. And even though the maps look pretty finished in terms of what they look at like, but they are in an alternative stage, which means that we're open for your comments in terms of changing it. And this is sort of like a brainstorming session. And I'm not sure if you've been involved with the brainstorming session. In fact, we had one with our team, and with Canada, Lisa, Rick, and we were talking about different ideas. And Canada said, well, any idea is open. No matter if you think it's silly or not realistic, we'll want to hear the ideas first, and then we'll decide, how should it be organized. So this is sort of like a brainstorming session, that everything's open, and again, when we have our breakout group, we want to hear from you in terms of what we present. This is the first alternative. I think most of you have it on your table. And what we call this is advancing existing resources. And what does that mean? Well, what this means was that we were planning the uses based on what is sort of on the ground right now. Obviously, we have 395, we have the City Hall, so we sort of based the plan around that. But before I go into the detail of that, one of the key features of both alternatives is that we have a framework. I can walk around and talk about the first alternative. We have a framework of what we call our greenways, or our open space corridors. And what are those? Those are areas where the drainage would happen, there are easements, and what we want to do is make them have multi-purposes in terms of pedestrian pathways, parks, helps the drainage, circulation, and all of that. So you have that pattern. And then crossing that pattern is our street pattern. And one of the most important things that we'd like to see what happens for Adelanto is establish a hierarchy of streets that have landscaping, pedestrian ways, bikeways, and also cars. And one of the mandates from the state of California is that they're pushing for what they call complete streets. And what that means is that streets provide more function than just for the cars. Obviously, they're for cars, but also you want to provide for the bicycle riders and for the pedestrian and for transit and for electric cars or anything that might happen in the future. And this is one of the things that I heard at my table last time, was one of the biggest problems that they saw today was traffic, not having sidewalks, not having pedestrian ways, and also the drainage in terms of things flood. So in terms of both the greenways and the streets and how their function is to allow for drainage and also connectivity in terms of all the various modes in terms of transportation. Okay, idea that we had, and which we heard, is establishing a town center. And in this case, our town center is where our city hall is. And, you know, a town center is just more than a city hall or a park, and that's what we would like to, you know, promote, is that it has a city hall, it has other facilities, maybe a library. This is where maybe a hospital or the medical facilities go. You have shops that you can walk around, and also residential around it, and there, you know, transit in terms of bus stops and things like that. So it's a complete place that's walkable and people can come to do multiple things, not just to go to City Hall. We talked about, or we heard from Rick about the airport, how important that is from a job standpoint. And in this particular case, how we want to link to the airport is having it through air expressway in terms of this connection and promoting, you know, shuttle buses or buses, pedestrian ways, trails, and having a strong connection to the airport, to our town center. And if we build up our town center in terms of commercial and restaurant, they will come to it rather than right now where it's just a city hall. So this is, in concept one, it's more of a linear connection to the airport. And then when we go to concept two, or alternative two, we'll show you a different way of connecting. Another ideal is coming up with a business district. And right now, in Adelanto, you really don't have a business district. You have heavy and light manufacturing. It's more in terms of industrial use. In terms of a business district, we talk about, yes, there's industrial, but there's also distribution, offices, limited commercial, and all the related facilities and things like that. And in terms of a business district, in terms of how you might imagine it, is right now you're manufacturing, you know, not many people go to your manufacturing other than people that work there. You know, so it's more connection in terms of business to business. From a business park, it's more in terms of business to consumer. So there's more opportunity for people to come to offices and things like that. So that's sort of the concept of business district. And where we have the business district located is right outside of the airport. And this is supposed to support the businesses in the airport, whereas right now, they're more logistically aircraft, so we have the smaller business right outside to capitalize on that. The other way we capitalize on the airport is what we call an airport development district. And that's located here and here in terms of proximity to the airport. And again, this is aircraft related, transportation, distribution type of businesses. Again, we're surrounding the airport with uses that relates to it to capitalize on it. Then we talk about a residential core. And the residential core, where we have identified, is right over here. And it's, you know, just northwest of City Hall. And the reason why we talk about that is we're trying to promote new residential development where the infrastructure is. That's where our infrastructure, existing infrastructure is. So that's where we're promoting in terms of our residential core. When we talk about residential core, it's just not houses. It's different types of houses. There's, you know, single family, like we talked about. Most of it is single family, but there's also some attached unit, maybe some apartment. But more important, it's also where your schools and parks are. And then the other residential area here is what we call residential connector to north and south. Now, we've heard, mainly from the realtors, and they were saying, you know, right now, Adelanto is separated. You have the south residential here, you have all mostly industrial land here, and then you have the north residential. It really doesn't tie together as a town because it's sort of bisected and connected. And I heard someone talk about the east 2200, you know, 2200, you know, 20. E220, okay, thank you. Yes, it's going to cut the town in half. So right now, the town is basically cut in half because of the manufacturing district. So what we're planning for is an area of residential that would tie it together. Again, this would have different types of residential. At this point, I don't think because of the location of the school, it's probably won't have a school in it, but it certainly will have parks and things, parks on it. And then we have our existing manufacturing district. And in this district, we have, the heavy manufacturing, the warehouses, we have a correctional facility. Also, this is where we think that there's opportunity for solar and wind or whatever, if that makes sense from a fiscal standpoint. That's where our renewable energy should be. The other concept that we promote in both plans is what we call the urban limits. And the urban limits is the alternative one goes here and here and here. Basically, what we're defining is where our new development should happen. Again, it's based on where is the infrastructure, where are the streets, and where are the services. Doesn't make sense to go out here because there's nothing out here, and it's very far away from the existing infrastructure. So what we're trying to do is consolidate where the services are. It only makes financial sense for the city and for people to do development. And the other thing that I want to talk about this is not to be anti-growth, or we're just saying and alerting people, this is where the infrastructure is. If someone wants to come over here and say, okay, I'm going to put in my own infrastructure and build a whole new community, and I'm not going to be a burden on the city in terms of expanding that, that's a decision by the planning commission and city council to make that decision. But we're on record to say, well, there's not very much infrastructure out there, so if you decide to build that, you have to come in with your proposal and make sense to the decision maker to go ahead with that. So we're saying, this is where we think it makes sense because that's where everything is right now. All your services, your city hall, your sheriff, everything is here. This is where we think things should go. We talked about the greenways, and those greenways is for drainage and easement. So we're talking about multi-purposes. Again, this shows you if you have parks and trails, it's associated. Right now, the city is deficient in terms of parks and recreation. So this is another way in terms of utilizing land for different purposes and to open it up to recreation. And then the last category we have is open space. And in terms of open space, we're showing this area as a potential area for open space. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that we think this is probably going to be lastly developed or have the potential because it's so far away from everything. And this does a couple things. One is preserves the character of Adelanto in terms of being not like downtown Victorville. You have open space up there, and everybody appreciates that. So we're preserving the character in terms of Adelanto, in terms of keeping it natural. The other thing is, you might say, well, gee, you're evaluating the land because you're not allowing these to build. There's also the possibility of using this for mitigation. And how that works is that if you develop in here, and Lisa probably could talk better in terms of that, if you're building in some habitat in terms of like the desert forest or things like that, you have to mitigate for that. And usually it's more than 1-to-1. So if you take out 1 acre of desert forest, you probably have to do 2 acres or 3 acres somewhere else within the property. If you don't have any area within your property, you go to off-site mitigation. So this has a possibility that people paying you for this land to use for mitigation. So it isn't like saying your land is worthless by any means. It's saying that it does have value, but it has value for mitigation. And the last thing that I want to mention for alternative 1 and also applies to alternative 2 is I think I heard someone talk about having gateways or announcing Adelanto. I know you have a sign, but we're talking about, you know, seeing
Something
if we
more
could-
than plywood?
a little bit more, you know, in terms of that, and we're just throwing out ideas, and it's both, and where's Gary? Gary's over there. Gary's an expert in terms of branding and marketing.
Yes.
And so maybe you might want to just talk a little bit about the importance of announcing the community and branding.